I'm going to take two more questions, and then I'm going to throw it to the panel.
How can labor gain independence from the Democratic Party? A session on labor and independent politics at the 2014 Labor Notes Conference presented various views on the question of labor's political independence.
And in this age of austerity and the attack on labor, we need more now, a real significant shift in our political dynamics than we've ever needed before.
Grassroots Illinois Action talked about building a new independent political organization with the Chicago Teachers Union and other organizations.
So today we are living in the city that is governed by a new mayor. He is attacking pensions. He has attacked all public sector unions in one way or another. He's closed in an unprecedented move, right, in the nation. He's closed 50 schools at one time. All while, he's closed clinics. I could go on and on. Grassroots Illinois Action is working with several partner organizations. The CTU is one of them, both labor and community, to build a new independent political organization that will emerge shortly here in Illinois.
As part of its strategy to back independent anti-machine Democrats, the Chicago Teachers Union endorsed two candidates running for state congressional districts in the March 2014 Democratic Party primary, Jay Travis and Will Guzzardi. Activist Jay Travis nearly won the Democratic Party primary in the 26th district, while calling for an elected school board and opposing attacks on public sector pensions. In the 39th district, Will Guzzardi comfortably won the Democratic Party primary, running against cuts for public schools and for a moratorium on charter schools. Abby Illenberger reminded us of former Mayor Harold Washington's progressive administration in 1987.
This is the city of the movement that elected Harold Washington, right, and defeated the machine. So in the 80s, a very powerful movement built by community organizers emerged to take City Hall and to elect this city's first black mayor and first progressive mayor, at least in many, many, many decades.
I'm here today to add my voice, not just to collective bargaining, but to fair and open collective bargaining between management and labor. If we are to have labor management peace in this country, whether in the private or public sector, it demands that the parties go to the table and sit down and talk ad nauseum, if you will, but talk over their problems collectively.
He supported collective bargaining, but which side was he on? His organization was built around an individual. In the end, no new independent political party was created. Without a new political party, Harold Washington's sudden death left a political vacuum, which was filled by Democrat Eugene Sawyer, elected by the City Council to complete Washington's term, then Richard M. Daley, then Rahm Emanuel. Kshama Sawant called for a definitive and permanent break with the Democratic Party. Sawant won her recent seat on the Seattle City Council as a Socialist Party candidate.
I know this is labor notes. We are the people who are not afraid to criticize the Democrats. But I want us to pose a bigger challenge for all of us and understand that it is not enough to simply criticize the Democrats. I will boo and hiss Rahm Emanuel with you, but it's not enough to boo and hiss. You have to pose a real challenge, make them tremble, and make them understand that the labor movement is not just going to have a conference where we will talk about the Democrats and talk about how they've failed us, how they've completely betrayed us, but talk about a real strategy for building an alternative to the Democrats and just completely reject them. When was the last time you were invited to a Democratic Party discussion where you got to vote on the program? How many of us here got to vote on whether or not single payer should be on the table? We didn't get a vote. That's why it was taken off the table. Goldman Sachs got a vote. Eli Lilly got a vote. All the pharmaceutical and insurance companies got a vote. We did not. people are hungry for alternatives. I cannot tell you how many people, when we ran our first campaign in 2012, how many people told us, are you sure you want to be so upfront about the fact that you're a socialist? Don't you want to, keep it a little bit in the background? I mean, do you really have to shout it from the rooftops? Does it have to say socialist on the leaflets? And I sound like I'm joking, but in reality, this is a serious question. Is the word socialism a barrier? I would say that not only is it not a barrier, but it is precisely what people are looking for. I don't mean the word socialism, but what I mean is a real program for a fight back against business as usual. I think it also relates to something that Jeff mentioned, which was, city council elections are nonpartisan. Does it really matter to run as independent? It really does matter. It matters. Because let's be honest with ourselves. All these cities that we're talking about, Chicago, New York City, Seattle, all the major cities, the cities where Occupy was active, and I like the word that Abby used, who rules these cities? It's not the Republicans, it's the Democratic Party establishment that rules this city. It was the Democratic mayors who called the police against Occupy and got them, to pepper spray and tear gas the activists. It wasn't the Republicans, it was the Democrats. That doesn't mean that there isn't a difference between Democrats and Republicans, but for us, the problem is not a lack of clarity on Republicans. The problem is the question that always stares us in the face: should we continue supporting the Democrats or should we break from them? And that's why even in a nominally nonpartisan race where the other candidates don't declare their Democratic Party affiliation, it is our job to say they are the Democrats, we are independents, we're socialists, and this is the program we're running on.
Besides the Socialist Party campaign, some activists from the floor wanted to talk about a Labor Party strategy.
What I wanted to say was, in the early years of the 20th century, when we first tried to launch industrial unions in this country, Henry Ford and the other employers tried to create phony alternatives, company unions, and we fell for it. We learned some bitter lessons, and we learned that you cannot have a union that includes both the workers and the employers and their supervisors and so forth. Why I'm raising this is that we learned a clear class line on the industrial field, and now we need to sound the alarm. We need to sound the alarm against phony independent political action. We need working class, socialist, working class, Labor Party alternative. We need to reject progressive fusion voting, where we get out and vote for our candidates and then throw our weight behind whichever capitalist party we think is the lesser evil.
In the last year, a Labor Party suddenly appeared in Ohio in an uprising against lesser evil Democrats, and it won. The Lorain County, Ohio Independent Labor Party was based in the unions, which provided a pre-existing structure. A trade unionist from Ohio, who was involved in that successful campaign, discussed what happened.
In Lorain, it was published a little bit. We had a situation where prior to the recent city council elections, the dominant forces had tried to bring in a Walmart superstore. And although both political parties, everybody supported that, the labor movement took an independent position and ended up winning every city ward on that. Coming off of that, we elected a building trades fellow from the sheet metal workers, Tony Krashenko, as mayor. And this recent development took place when young Democrats allied with the business community took over the Democratic Party and attacked labor, ending project labor agreements that we had set up, and a number of other ways going after labor. And labor felt like, we had to assert ourselves. And in Lorain County, Lorain has been one of the most dense labor counties in the United States. They ended up running a dozen candidates, I believe it was, for various positions, and including against the head of the city Chamber of Commerce, and won them all. They went out and got hundreds of T-shirts that said Independent Labor Party. The truth is, and I think it's important to know the difference. There is no, major infrastructure of an independent political party as yet, but I would kind of make the analogy to a kind of a newborn infant or a young deer kind of trying to get on their feet. And I think labor asserted themselves and let them know in that area that no, you can't just roll back things that we fought for and won.
After the Labor Notes meeting, we looked into two aldermanic campaigns in Chicago. Chicago Teachers Union member Tim Meegan is running his own campaign in Chicago's 33rd Ward. Candidates for alderman do not declare party affiliation, but Meegan volunteers. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. We caught up with Meegan in front of the Chicago Public Schools offices during a protest against CPS plans for a new selective enrollment high school, named for Obama.
Well, I mean, clearly, naming a new selective enrollment high school on the north side, after President Barack Obama, the nation's first black president, it's clearly a political ploy in order to placate south and west side parents who saw 50 schools closed. And, does Ron really think that we're that stupid, that we would fall for such a silly trick? And we don't see how it's fair or right that they open an additional selective enrollment high school on the north side for $60 million when they can't even fund their neighborhood schools.
At a town hall meeting in the 33rd Ward, Tim Meegan introduced his platform.
For those of you that aren't familiar with our platform, first we need to stop privatization in our city. Privatization is just a giveaway to multimillionaires and billionaires. These things, whether you're talking about the Port Authority and Midway Airport or the parking meters or our public schools, these are public assets. They belong to the taxpayers and they need to stay in the hands of the taxpayers. What's more disturbing to me is just the total lack of control, the total lack of voice that Chicago citizens have in what actually happens in our city. And that needs to change. I'm in favor of abolishing TIFs. So let's stop creating new TIF districts. Let's let the ones that are there expire. TIFs siphon off $250 million just from the CPS alone. And there's your money for the pension payment right there. But instead, that money, because the TIF districts, when they're contiguous, they can port that money and they port it straight to downtown. And we have a beautiful downtown. But we are proud of our neighborhoods too. And that's where the money comes from, and that's where the money needs to stay. We need better services here in the ward. I was talking to Don about the idea of the advisory council that existed under Dick Mell, and there should be a transparent, democratic advisory council that the alderman has to answer to, and I'm absolutely 100% in favor of working closely with both neighborhood organizations and a 33rd Ward advisory council. The $15 minimum wage is something that's necessary. And the reason is there are too many of our families, like Antonio mentioned, that are spending 50% of their income just on rent. And those are my students' families. And I see the struggles that they go through every day, and I see how it impacts students' education. So affordable housing, and I love Central Autonomous Plan for two reasons. Because one of the main things that I like about it is it doesn't involve the government. And so it's harder to be corrupt about it. It involves a community organization where banks are working directly with community organizations. If you ask me what's my plan on crime, my crime plan is $15 minimum wage. When it comes to education, a lot of, Angela mentioned the testing. We have to, data for this corporate school reform beast, that's the linchpin right there. If you take that away, if citizens say, no, I will not let you test my child excessively, the whole thing falls apart. we need to put a moratorium on school closings and charter expansion. And as alderman, I have a great deal of control over zoning. And one of the things that I want to do is prevent charters from opening up new charters in our neighborhood, because they draw away our students and they spit out the students that they consider to be undesirable, and they end up being more and more concentrated in our neighborhood public high schools. And then the test scores go down, and it provides a self-justification for closure. My vision on education is the public school is a place where rich and poor, black and white, people of all classes, creeds, and colors can all come together, and we have that basic foundation that is so essential, that common knowledge. It's so essential to a functioning democracy, and it's where all those different people learn to understand and respect each other's differences. And we lose a lot of that. What I want to see happen with the existing charter schools, I'm not in favor of closing anybody's school. I'm not in favor of destroying people's communities. Rather, what I would see, I want to help charter teachers organize, form unions, win contracts. I want to see them paid like CPS teachers, and because we're all teachers, and that's what they deserve, and their kids are going to be better prepared for life for it. And then eventually, when the corporate world moves on to the next hot investment topic, then we'll roll those schools right back into the CPS system, and they'll become neighborhood schools. And then restorative justice. I stand for restorative justice in our schools, just because we got to stop throwing our kids out, and these punitive consequences for kids, for schools that don't make the numbers. Well, you just provided an incentive for that school to find a way to get rid of that kid. The lowest scoring kids are the kids that are highest in poverty, and they're the kids that often create the most behavior problems. So we need wraparound social services for those kids. Revenue. Real briefly, revenue. I support a financial transaction tax. We're talking about $1 to $2 tax per transaction on both the buyer and the seller at the CME, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. $1 or a $2 tax on $225,000 transaction is not excessive at all, and it'll raise $10 to $12 billion a year. That's an enormous amount of money, and if those folks think that they would rather do their trading in Naperville or somewhere where there's no financial transaction tax, then good luck to you. Is it true that you can do all your trading on a computer at home? Well, then why do these guys get out of bed in the morning in the first place and come downtown? Because there are other benefits. There are a host of other benefits by agglomerating all those like minds and all those like businesses in one place. And if we charge those folks $1 or $2 per transaction, they're not going anywhere. It's an empty threat. Also, I support a graduated income tax at the state level. Not all my issues are local ward issues. I know that. But these are issues that affect all of us. But that's what I stand for. And so I'm asking for your support. So now I'll be quiet, and I'd love to hear your questions.
In Chicago's 25th Ward, Jorge Mujica is, like Sawant in Seattle, making a definitive break with the Democratic Party by running as a candidate of the Chicago Socialist campaign.
My name is Jorge Mujica. I am an activist, labor activist, community activist. I have worked for several labor unions from the old times, ILG, WU, and many others, UE. And now I was chosen as the candidate for the Chicago Socialist campaign. This is like 10 organizations coming together to run a campaign to win a socialist seat in City Council in Chicago. This is the center of the Mexican community in Chicago, Plaza Tenochtitlan on Blue Island and 18th Street. The Mexican community in Chicago has been here for about 100 years. They originally came to work in the railroads, to work in the backyards back south, but they ended up establishing themselves here. This used to be a Czech colony and then an Irish colony, and we ended up having one of the largest concentration of Mexicans in the city of Chicago. Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the world. And very curiously, the current alderman who led the fight supposedly to have more Latino wards disassembled this ward completely. Originally, this was a 90% Latino ward, but after the last mapping, it became a 45% Latino ward. The current alderman integrated zones far from to the north from here and Chinatown to the map, so that there are three very distinct sectors living here and very different populations. You have the population who lives with under $20,000 a year household income, and the population who has $120,000 a year household income. The theory of the current alderman is that dividing in that way the ward, he would be invincible. He would win with either two of three different sectors here, so he would remain in power forever. Those are the offices of the current alderman, Danny Solis. He was handpicked by Richard Daley to be the alderman in the 25th ward after an entrapment of the old alderman of the 25th ward. Danny Solis was, up to then, the executive director of UNO, the United Neighborhood Organization, which is the organization who runs the largest scheme in the nation of charter schools. And of course, he has been promoting more and more charter schools in the neighborhood instead of supporting the public schools. No schools were closed here last year because they are basically overcrowded. They couldn't find an excuse to close our schools, but he would like to charter, whatever he can find. He's the president of the zoning committee in City Hall. Anything you want to do with land in the city of Chicago, you have to come begging to Danny Solis to make a deal, to cut a deal. So he's powerful all over, but his incredible weakness is that here in the ward, nobody likes him. He only got 3,800 votes, and that's how he ended up in City Hall for the last 4 years. But that's why we believe that we can defeat him very easily. The whole Pilsen, the whole Mexican neighborhood voted against Danny Solis in the last election. That's the enemy to defeat. It was only people living outside the Mexican community, outside Pilsen, who voted in favor of Solis because of the characteristics of the ward. We have to deal with several issues here in this district, the district as a whole. We have to deal with low income, unemployment, obviously, stolen wages. Many people who were supposed to be earning minimum wage are seeing their wages stolen, up to $4,000 a year per every worker. We have to deal with issues of contamination and pollution. Danny Solis' committee of zoning just approved one heliport south of the ward and one heliport north of the ward because executives are tired to have to drive from O'Hare all the way to downtown. So they need a helipad, to land right here and be 5-10 minutes away from downtown. So we're going to have 120 flights a day of helicopters, coming in and out without any kind of benefit for the district. The metal shredder, there's a metal shredder that wants to set up shop here, create maybe 30 jobs, which is nothing. It doesn't benefit the ward at all, and it's going to be polluting all the air again just after we were successful in shutting down the coal plants 2 years ago. So now we are facing new kinds of pollution, noise pollution and the metal shredder pollution just a block away from our main high school here. We have the problem of gentrification. Land deals are going very fast, very rapidly, thanks to Danny Solis. And it's not that we want to be a Mexican ghetto, but these land deals are displacing the population at an incredible rate. We lost between 10 and 15,000 local residents in the last 10 years because we just can't afford the rents anymore. So we have to fight against that. We have to fight against evictions. So those are some of the issues that we are facing in this campaign and we are facing in this ward. When you talk about national politics, there's supposed to be a friend of labor and an enemy of labor. The Democratic Party is the friend, and the enemy is the Republican Party. In the city of Chicago, this is absolutely not true. The 50 seats of city council are occupied by Democrats. The Cook County board is occupied all by Democrats except for a few, 2 Republicans out of 13, I think. Everything is the Democratic Party here. This is a big machine. So when you talk in Chicago about the enemy, the enemy is the Democratic Party, is the machine of the Democratic Party, is the politics of the Democratic Party. That is reflected here in the ward, and that is reflected all over the city of Chicago. That's why we decided that we had to run a campaign completely separate and independent from the Democratic Party, and we had to cut the line. It is not possible to be playing around with words and saying, I am independent, liberal, progressive, democratic Democrat. No, that you're still in the Democratic Party side, or you have to get away from it. And that's exactly what we did. We declared this is a socialist campaign. We are not Democrats. We are playing against the Democratic Party. We are going against the Democratic Party because the big responsible for all the problems in the ward and in the city of Chicago is, no doubt about it, the Democratic Party.
We hear our national union leaders speak before conventions and rail against the politicians of both parties, but then they retreat in the end. And most of our fellow co-workers, including committed activists, retreat with them. That we need to do the responsible thing. We need to be real, to live to fight another day. We hear over and over how a realistic candidate is one who has political experiences, credentials in politics, who can win. Yet these are the very ones who got us into this mess and keep us in this mess. How many more rivers do we have to be sold down for how many more generations before we decide to make this break? I'm sort of practicing how to talk to my coworkers.